Hello, my name is Amy, and I've been working for the Closing Loops project of Food Futures, running a feasibility study since last June 2023, asking the question, could business food waste in North Lancashire be collected and composted in a closed loop system? The UK produces the largest amount of food waste in Europe, which in turn produces huge greenhouse gas emissions, and the UK hospitality and food service industry in particular waste a lot of food. On average, almost 20% of food purchased by the sector is being thrown away. And for every gram of food that ends up in the bin, there's an environmental cost that comes with that. So not only does the production process of food release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the problem is made worse when food ends up in the bin and rotting in landfill, which then releases methane. And if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and the US. So it is a huge problem. And not only is this creating greenhouse gas emissions, it's also costing the hospitality industry and food industry a lot of money. It's losing businesses money, and the general public are becoming more aware of the issue and it's influencing the choices they make. As part of the latest Environment Act 2021, the government announced mandatory food waste separation for all businesses in England. And last October 2023, they released more details around this so that local authorities and waste collection authorities in England must arrange a weekly food waste collection for all households by March 2026. Businesses have until March 2025, so next March, or 2027, depending on the size of the business, to separate their food waste. So micro firms of less than 10 employees have until 2027 to comply. But firms any larger than 10 employees will have to separate their food waste by next March 2025. And food waste cannot be sent to landfill or incineration anymore. It has to be sent for recycling via anaerobic digestion or composting, both of which I'll explain a little bit more about. And finally, to say the businesses are going to be responsible for the fees of the waste recycling. And it's not just businesses, this also includes schools, universities, hospitals as well, who are going to have to separate their food waste and send it off for recycling in some way as early as next year. So this diagram just gives you an overview of the government waste hierarchy in the UK, in England, and their preference of what happens to waste. So first they suggest preventing waste in the first place, food waste in the first place, next to redistribute it to other people, next to send it to animal feed, and then after that comes recycling. And within recycling, the government preference is that food waste is sent for anaerobic digestion, and then, or the next option is to send it for composting. And to explain very briefly what this is, anaerobic digestion is an anaerobic process, so without oxygen, which breaks down organic matter or food to produce methane, which can be used as a gas for energy. And the process also produces a biofertilizer byproduct, which can be used on the land. Composting is an aerobic process, so with oxygen, and it also breaks down organic matter, so food, but also leaves, garden waste, etc., over time using naturally occurring organisms. And it's similar to the process that naturally happens on a forest floor, where dead and decaying matter will break down to create a nutrient rich soil material, which is compost. And that can then be used to grow food and improve soil health. And this government are promoting anaerobic digestion over composting and subsidizing this as it can produce a natural gas or a green gas. However, especially on a large scale, the biofertilizer produced by anaerobic digestion is very high in nitrogen, which can actually cause problems to the soil and run off into waterways. So currently, half of the local authorities across England provide household waste collection, and the majority of these send the food collected to be recycled via anaerobic digestion, like I've just been talking about. Some local authorities do send food to be turned into compost, but this is usually on a mass scale. And sending food waste in large amounts to centralized facilities raises questions of the environmental impacts that this has, because the emissions of most likely diesel trucks making long journeys, taking food to a centralized facility, can produce a lot of emissions. And compost made on a large scale is often made quickly under very high temperatures, which can kill the beneficial microbes that we want in compost for the soil. And anaerobic digestion, the biodigest that I mentioned before, is very high in available nitrogen, which can actually be too high levels for the soil, which can cause water pollution and also can damage the soil. So there's problems with these large scale recycling options. When we talk about living soil or local scale living soil, on the other hand, we're talking about compost that's made slowly and left undisturbed, unlike compost made on a fast mass scale. So the temperatures used are high enough to kill any dangerous pathogens in the soil, but they're not so high to destroy the beneficial microbes that we want in the soil too. And compost made from food waste in this way, so slowly and left undisturbed, has many, many benefits, including improving soil structure, feeding plants, helping the soil retain moisture, and sequestering carbon. And this is an example of some compost made by a compost club in the UK. And you can see the white mycelium and lots of beneficial microorganisms in the compost that's been made because it's been made slowly and left undisturbed. So that summarizes the options of food waste recycling. And now a quick summary of what's happening already in North Lancashire. So currently in North Lancashire, there's no food collection service in the district at all for households or businesses. But the county council do plan to collect household food waste when the government legislation kicks in 2026. And they plan to send this food waste to Farrington Waste Park facilities. However, this waste park is at least 30 miles from the centre of Lancaster, so the city centre, and it goes via Middleton transfer station. So it is a large scale operation, which brings into question some of the points I made in the slide before about emissions and the impacts of that. And there's no clear plan at the moment from the council for non-household food waste, for example, from businesses, the university, etc. The county council did tell us that if there's capacity, they would consider opening another anaerobic digestion site at Thornton Recovery Park. So currently for businesses in Lancaster, for separating and recycling their food waste, the only option, unless they do it themselves, are private waste companies, and they presumably will also send the waste to anaerobic digestion. So this feasibility study that we're discussing today focuses on small to medium-sized food businesses in the district. But there will also be lots of other food businesses like offices, schools, hospitals, the university, etc., who will need to recycle their food waste too. So as part of the research, I identified 226 small to medium-sized food businesses, but like I just said, there's going to be a lot more other businesses that need their food waste collecting too. So we can really see a space for a local solution for collecting food waste from businesses and turning it into compost to create a closed loop system in the district. So the compost can also stay and be used in the district by local gardeners, farmers, etc., rather than sending it a long way to anaerobic digestion. So this slide is summarising the research that I carried out as part of this study. So a large part of that was a survey that was sent to local food businesses and schools in the district. And the survey was sent to about 200 businesses and schools. However, it had a low response rate of only about 15% responding. Those that did reply were very, very interested in recycling their food waste. So 90% of the businesses were interested in recycling their food waste. And it's important to note that this survey was sent out before the government released new details saying that it would be as early as next year that businesses would need to separate their food waste. So it's very likely that actually there was very low awareness in the district and in the country about the need to separate food waste, and that could explain the low response rate to this survey. And that's also exemplified in this second bullet point here. Only 15% of businesses that answered the survey and no schools were aware of this Environment Act requirement from 2021 of the need to separate food waste. But from the survey, those who did answer, and then a more intimate focus group I ran with 8 local businesses, businesses told us that the main impact for recycling their food waste and separating it were reducing their environmental impacts as a business and what their customers would think of them as well and their sustainability efforts. They said the main barrier to them recycling their food waste currently would be having to pay any extra costs. And the majority of schools and businesses said they would be interested in a local initiative collecting food waste and making compost rather than a big private waste collector. And then on the other hand, we did some research with people who would potentially be compost users in the district from any compost that could be made from this scheme. So I spoke to local community gardens and farms, schools with gardens, and also allotment users, and asked them if they would be interested in peat-free, locally produced compost from a food waste collection scheme. And there was high interest for high quality compost. There were concerns about peat-free compost that's currently on the market being contaminated with plastics, not being very high quality. So there was interest in a new product being available locally. So there is desire for peat-free compost, and there's also interest from businesses to make environmentally friendly choices. And businesses will soon have to separate their food waste and have it collected. And the county council will be under pressure to take household food waste, let alone the business food waste, as early as next year. So it feels very timely in the district to have a local food waste collection solution. So one potential solution from researching what else is happening in the UK are compost clubs. So these clubs take on household or businesses as members. They pay on a weekly basis or similar for their food waste to be collected, usually in buckets, like you can see in this photo here. And then the compost clubs collect the food waste, and in return, they send their members high quality compost made from their food waste, high quality living soil compost. And the members know that their food waste is being collected in an environmentally friendly way, supporting a local business and with very few travel miles. And many compost clubs use something called bokashi, and this is a mix of bran and molasses, which has been inoculated with microorganisms, and it significantly reduces the odor of food waste. It also helps the food waste ferment and suppresses pathogens, so it means that food waste can be collected less frequently. It's a really clever solution for compost clubs. And this image here is from one of the compost clubs in the UK down in Brighton. They got their compost tested, and this is what a lot of these compost clubs do. They get their compost tested in a lab to show its superior quality to usual compost sold in garden centres and over mass-produced compost that I mentioned before. They can charge a higher price for this compost and for their membership scheme collecting food waste because of this, because of the work they're doing. And this is a quote here from a compost club in Devon. They said people chose to sign up with them and pay a bit more to have their food waste collected because they know that they're a part of a regenerative, sustainable, local, friendly service rather than a faceless, larger, perhaps private company. So, final part of this research is presenting 4 business models for collecting local business food waste in North Lancashire and turning it into peat-free compost to sell or donate locally. And I came up with 4 potential business models for how this could work from all this research discussed already. So the first model would be council-led, and the city council and the county council have no obligation to collect or deal with business food waste. However, they could decide to take on business food waste as well as the household food waste that they're already going to be collecting in 2026. But rather than adding it to their pile that would be taken to anaerobic digestion, they could decide that someone in their waste department takes on this project collecting business food waste and creating compost on a council site. Or alternatively, the council could donate a council site, and allow a separate entity or organisation to run the food waste collection scheme. And perhaps the council could offer unused land with access to water and electricity for free, or even their vehicles that they're going to use to collect the household food waste to help the new scheme collect business food waste. And the pros of this model was that large amounts of food waste could be collected because the council could cover the district and have many sites available for them to make compost. The council could also cover the costs of the site, and it could provide many green jobs across the district. The cons of this model include, like I mentioned before, that on a large scale, compost quality can be made quickly under too high temperatures and be of poor quality. And a larger scheme could risk having environmental impacts, for example, if they were using diesel trucks. And a larger scheme like this could lose the local element of a small scheme, and having the council involved could potentially slow down a separate business and add a level of bureaucracy. Second suggested model is that there's one large collector across the district taking food waste to multiple collection sites where compost could be made and food waste could be taken to along the district. And these are significantly closer than the current anaerobic digestion parks. And this model exists in other European cities. For example, in Lyon in France, there's one big collector called Les Alchimistes who collect Lyon's food waste from events, hospitals, businesses, and take it to one big site to make compost. However, in the UK, we've got different rules and regulations, so there's actually a limit of how much food waste and compost can be on one site at one time without needing an expensive environmental permit. So this model could only work if the organisation running it got an environmental permit, and these can cost up to £11,000 a year, and that's the first con of this model. There'd also be very high upfront costs because the composters, the actual machines needed to compost this much food waste, would be very expensive. We'd also need to ensure that there was green transport used to collect the food waste. And the pros of this model include, similarly to the model before, that you could collect large amounts of food waste across the whole district, but also provide many new green jobs. And if it was run in a green way, for example, with electric trucks, it could be a really good way of doing something environmentally positive for the district on a large scale and involving lots of people. So the third model is a smaller, more localized version of the previous model, allowing space for several compost clubs to set up across the district. For example, one or more in the city centre, in Lancaster city centre, could collect food waste from businesses there and take it to a site near the city centre within the legislation limits of what's allowed on one site at one time, like I mentioned before. There could also be one in Morecambe, one in Carnforth, so different localised sites run by different compost clubs. And businesses would again sign up as members and pay a monthly fee for their food waste to be collected each week by these compost clubs. And to keep costs down and make this more feasible to start up, the council or a local parish could be asked to donate land for the composting site. And this has been seen to be done for other compost clubs across the UK. And the pros of this model are that there'd be shorter travel distances between food waste collection and a compost site, so it's more environmentally friendly. It's also a local community focused approach, which could create better relationships with clients, and it could encourage environmental action and involvement within communities. It also allows for different businesses and clubs to set up who could come together as a collective to apply for grants or share equipment, etc. And the smaller sites wouldn't need to apply for the expensive environmental permit that I mentioned before. The cons are that multiple compost clubs working in one district could create some competition and compete for funding, for example, or for council support. And it also relies on some different clubs having the initiative to actually set up and start. And the final model is what I called microsites. So this is different to other models because rather than a compost club or a membership scheme where businesses pay each week or each month to have their food waste collected, actually the idea is that businesses, so 2 or 3 businesses, for example, would come together in different areas. So these areas just give suggestions of where this could happen. So businesses who are geographically close together come together to buy a compost tumbler and they share it to create their own compost on one site. So they can compost their own food waste. They then don't need to pay anyone to come and collect it for them. And they also have the benefit of creating their own compost. So this could work particularly well for some schools in Lancaster who are close together. And if one of them has a school garden to actually use the compost in. Or in rural areas where a compost club or private waste collector couldn't come and collect the food waste so easily. So the pros of this are that individual businesses could save a lot of money on food waste collection because food waste collection is becoming mandatory. The cons are that compost tumblers are an upfront cost, and as this isn't sort of a business, compost club business, the businesses wouldn't be making money from membership to buy these compost tumblers. It would also require the time and resources for someone to manage and move their food waste from their restaurant, for example, to the restaurant or business that had the compost tumbler. And for this, you do need a waste transport permit to transport waste. But it's important to note that these are very easy to apply for and cheap. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the 4 business models. And this is just a photo of one of the compost clubs in Hay-on-Wye, who have, I think, 8 members that they collect food waste from. So it is possible to be done on a small scale quite neatly. So, in summary, from all of that, this feasibility study has been about setting the context in North Lancashire for how a local food waste collection and compost creation scheme could work. And what we've seen across the UK seems to be that grassroots, small scale food waste collection compost clubs are working. And the larger private waste collectors, it's harder to know what impact they're having. And it's most likely that they're sending their food waste to anaerobic digestion. And from all of the business models discussed, and given the context in North Lancashire, I would suggest starting small with business model 3, so a collective of different compost clubs across the district, giving the space for different groups to set up collection schemes and create compost. And that could create many green jobs, create high quality compost in the area, keep emissions low, and maybe start to create a circular economy movement and local buzz for composting and reducing food waste. And this could be complemented with Model 4, which is microsites. So, more rural businesses, perhaps, or schools coming together in twos or threes to buy a tumbler and create their own compost and collect their own food waste. And it is possible that actually all of the models could work across Lancashire because it is a big district with many different needs. And the next suggestion here, central hub. And what I mean by this is that someone like Food Futures or similar, it could be one of the compost clubs, could provide support or links to funding or be the main body that apply for funding to share equipment, for example, compost tumblers, or to liaise with the council etc., to find spaces for compost sites. So to encourage collaboration if there were lots of different compost clubs or businesses working across the district rather than competition. And finally, right time. It really feels like the perfect time to be having these conversations because the government announced last October that businesses will need to separate their food waste and send it for recycling. The council are going to need to collect household food waste from 2026. And from the research, there is local interest from a small group of businesses to be more environmentally friendly and take part in a local food waste collection and composting schemes. And like I mentioned, there are allotments and small farms in the district who want to buy high quality, peat free compost made from a scheme like this. So, this research and the space for a closed loop solution to collect food waste and create compost feels really, really timely. So, I'm really glad that you're all getting together today to discuss this further. And here is a link for the full report, which goes into a lot more detail on all of this. It also includes costings, potential costings for each of those business models that I ran through. And it gives a lot more detail for someone who would potentially want to set up a business collecting food waste in the district, giving a lot more context from the district and comparing other compost clubs in the UK, different compost technology, many, many things in there. So I recommend having a read of that if you're interested. So finally, thank you for listening, and please let me know if you have any questions.